Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you to the knowledge sharing session on how to deal with our supply chains in a post-lockdown scenario. There's one housekeeping announcement which I would like to make at the beginning. There will be 2 rounds of polling. One right now, you would have seen the question on your screen, and the second at the end of the panel discussion, before the question and answer session begins. I request you all to please share your views and opinions to make this webinar more relevant. Please follow these instructions on screen to record your opinion, and also request all the attendees to please keep your questions coming. The more questions we have, the better will be the interaction. Having said that, let me now start with the introduction to the seminar. The Institute of Supply Chain Management has been at the forefront of delivering knowledge sessions to people across the country. We are specialized in supply chain management and demand planning and forecasting. COVID-19 is something that is occupying all our attention at present. A pandemic which started from a small city in China brought the global trade down to its knees. We are looking at a growth of around 1.5 to 2.8% in GDP this year, from where it was projected at around 5.5%. Unprecedented turbulence in supply chains, unprecedented turbulence in the way we do business. To make sense of this, I would now request Aanchal Sood from SAP to please introduce the session and the highlights of it. Aanchal, over to you.
Girish. Hello everyone, my name is Aanchal Sood. I work for Global Center of Excellence Digital Supply Chain at SAP. Continuing with what you said, Girish, we are all facing a dilemma. On one hand, we want ourselves, our families, our workforce to be safe. And on the other hand, we need to ensure continued business operations. We need to support the economy. To operate in this new normal, we need to rethink how to use supply chains to drive the recovery in short term and become more resilient, more sustainable in the long term. We at SAP are committed to helping our customers successfully manage their supply chains. And for current pandemic, current lockdown, there are no clear answers. There are no past learnings to build on. The only way forward we see is by coming together as a fraternity and share learnings with each other. As the first initiative under our support and knowledge sharing program, we partnered with ISCM to bring together today's panel discussion with supply chain leaders. Let us all learn from their experiences and individually assess what role we can play, how we can support and strengthen supply chain ecosystem. Thanks, Girish. We can now continue.
Thank you, Aanchal. Yeah, thank you, Aanchal. I would now proceed to introduce to you the array of thought leaders that we have lined up for you, beginning with Dr. Ravi Prakash Mathur, Senior Director Supply Chain, Head of Logistics, Central Planning and Corporate Sourcing at Dr. Reddy Laboratory. Somnath Das, Director Supply Chain, Nivea India at Bayersdorf. Saurabh Lal, Director Supply Chain, India and South Asia at Kellogg Company. R. Anand, Chief Supply Chain at Future Consumer Limited. Dr. Rakesh Sinha, CEO Reflexive Supply Chain Solutions. Radha Mohan Gupta, Regional Procurement Director, South Asia at Reckitt Benckiser. Mahesh Ketan, Global Supply Chain Head at Grasim Industries Limited, Epoxy Division. Satish Lakaraju, CCO, Agility. Deepak Wazirani, Executive Director, Supply Chain India and Southeast Asia at Diversity India Hygiene Private Limited. We also have with us Kirikant Avadhanullah, SAP, from SAP Director Supply Chain Solutions, and Ishwaran Subramanian, Partner Strategy and Operations Consulting at Deloitte. The panels will be moderated by Dr. Rakesh Singh, Chairman, Institute of Supply Chain Management. I invite Dr. Rakesh Singh to start with the discussions.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this first ISCM SAP webinar series on navigating the new normal. And as already said, it is an online knowledge sharing platform for business leaders, and you see the area of leaders that are there. COVID-19 has hit the world in an unprecedented scale and speed. It has led to stoppage of factories, stoppage of global supply chains, stoppage of local supply chains, stoppage of logistics network, the overall supply chain network. And the spread of the pandemic itself has created three kinds of disruptions. One started with supply disruptions, then with demand disruptions, and overall business disruption, as the pandemic led to a large-scale lockdown of the societies across the world. And as we in India see that we are now under lockdown, and we see another lockdown coming, and we do not know till what time different kinds of lockdowns and clustering of lockdowns is going to happen. We thought that this would be a good time to really look at the last 21 days as to how supply chain has been impacted, and how supply chain will be impacted in the midterm, and how the supply chain needs to be reformed in the long run. So I see that companies have resolved to meet the challenges of supply chain management during the lockdown period. We are also creating resilience policies to see that we meet the immediate future. And when we return to normal, how do we really reimagine the supply chain in a big way? And I think these are the challenges that we see. So in the first series of this talk here, we first invite Dr. Ravi Prakash Mathur, Senior Director Supply Chain and Head of Logistics and Central Planning from Dr. Reddy's Laboratory, to join me for the discussion. I won't waste much time on this, but I would like to know the kind of impact this pandemic and the lockdown have had on Indian businesses during the last 21 days.
Yeah, okay. First, let me hope that everybody on the panel and all the audience that we have on the webinar, they're all safe, as also their families, and they're all safe at home. With that wish, I'll take your question. Yeah, so I mean, I'm expressing my personal views here, of course. And as everyone knows, the supply chains are now hugely disrupted. And but since we are in the pharma space, we have had to, I mean, we consider as essential operations, essential services. So we have had to, and we have been at the forefront, at the front line of this pandemic, fighting to get markets across. So they are coming on. So getting the logistics in place, getting your service providers back in place. The largest, I mean, the biggest issue has, of course, been the availability of manpower. So whether it is the people to, come and operate in your warehouses, or it is the drivers who are available. The initial days were about getting permissions and about getting exemptions from the authorities to get your operations moving. But now it is about manpower, and I think now it is we're improving. As I'm sure most of the people who over here, that's also the experience. As the days are passing, things are, I will not say moving towards normal, yes, but trying to get a sense towards normal. Yeah, Rakesh, so you have a specific question that you want me to take?
Now, how have you dealt with these situations? You said there has been earlier, there was a logistic disruption, but now it's more of a labor availability. So how, in general, how do you say companies can actually meet this problem?
Okay, so I mean, couple of comments on that. Number one, if in the past you have had a strategy of investing in long-term relationships, having strategic partnerships, I mean, that is where the differentiation comes. For example, if people have always been, cost focused, operating in spot markets, then this becomes really very difficult because the normal partners, they are not able to stand up and deliver to you. That is one part. So all the investment in building relationships in your supply chain, that is where the differentiation comes. Having said that, uh, even your regular partners, even your regular service providers, they are also struggling, and the reason is the same. The biggest reason is non-availability of manpower. So everybody is struggling with that. So there, as a strategy, though you will continue to leverage your existing network, what you also have to do as an organization is to quickly scale up and to quickly expand your base. And therein, if your normal processes of onboarding new service providers, new partners is say X number of days or X number of months. The challenge here is how are you able to compress that period to ensure that you have compliance that you have to take care of. Those kind of parameters are still met, but at the same time you're able to expand all that the market is able to offer to you and move forward with what you want to achieve. So you have to keep an eye out open for emerging solutions. You just cannot rely again on what is already on board. For example, if you talk about international logistics, you have to be aware of what kind of charters are flying in, what kind of charters are flying out.
Ravi, can you also talk about the factory challenges and manufacturing challenges that has been a problem in these 21 days?
Yeah, so I mean, manufacturing is a very vast subject. It's a huge, complex subject. So uh, not possible to comment on the entire thing, but of course the main issue has been across around availability of manpower, getting people to reach the office area or the workplace in the situation of a lockdown. How do you get exemptions to get people, especially in cross border situations where the workforce has gone back to the other states. So those have been the major challenges, and
Dr. Ravi, you can also tell us now what happened to your planning, because you had so what kind of disruption has this particular pandemic brought to your planning processes?
Okay, that's an excellent question, Dr. Rakesh. So the thing is that the entire supply chain is disrupted. Good that you asked me this question. It is in the normal scenario, you have a demand planning process that converts the demand into a requisition plan for manufacturing, that converted into a requisition plan for your raw materials and your key starting materials. Now this disruption is there end to end. So a lot of people will not be able to supply. Your competitors will not be able to supply. Your your suppliers will not be able to supply. The suppliers to suppliers will not be able to supply. So as a result of which, your demand is going to shift hugely. So your traditional forecasting process, your entire demand planning process, if you ask me, is out of the window. There is no way that since in the absence of historical data, you don't really have a statistical model that can help you to deal with the situation. So you have to go back to situation. I mean, you have to go back to solutions like scenario modeling, quickly building scenarios. How do you model the end-to-end supply chain, and figure out where in your own back-end supply chain the disruptions are, and where the disruptions are there in your competitor supply chain, and then see where the demand led. So there is no solution, but I think people who are at a fairly high level of sophistication in getting market intelligence, those are the people who will be able to crack it. You cannot rely on your traditional planning softwares or your traditional SNOP processes. In my view, those really have to be rethought about, reconfigured, and that is the challenge for people like SAP or the other planning engine providers who are in that space. So a great deal of rethinking has to happen. Uh, how do you even capture the demand correctly, because there is going to be no sense in the way you have been doing it in the past. So
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mathur. Uh, it was indeed an eye-opener for us. It was indeed a good start to the proceedings. We will now quickly move on to the next four panelists. We have with us Mr. Somnath Das, Mr. Saurabh Lal, R. Anand, and Dr. Rakesh Sinha. Can we have them up on, please? Thank you very much. Again, sorry, we kind of have some technical issues with Dr. Singh's video. I'll try and step in and moderate this session till Dr. Rakesh Singh comes back online. Again, in no particular order, but if I were to start with if you could request Saurabh to please give us his opinion on what is it that his firm is looking at when it comes to this disruption and how is he going to handle it?
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Girish. Hi, good to see you all, guys, and anyone else who's listening on the webinar. It's very good to get connected with other supply chain guys, and I think one of the big things for supply chain has been that we've become suddenly part of a much larger community, and everyone has been sharing a lot of inputs, information, and ways of working during this particular time. It's a black swan event, as they call it, right? So I think that's this will forever for us supply chain guys, even with a quarter of century of experience behind us. We have never seen anything like this, right? I doubt we'll see it again. But at the same time, there are a few things which I try to note down, which I think would be helpful to other people. The first and the very big thing here is going to be going hyper local. Right, so it's not just about being local, it's being hyper local, both in terms of how you respond to the directives and changes which happen in the areas where your plants are situated, where your warehouses, where your CFAs are situated. So to give you an example, while the union government will say that across India all warehouses should be kept open, when you go to a city like, say, Indore has been completely shut down, right? So there is no way that the union government directive is going to be applicable there. You keep close to the ground in Indore. As soon as you start hearing that the lockdown is getting lifted, you start moving you've already got this listed on who are the people that you need to contact to get the requisite permissions, and there are multiple layers of permission that you'll need. So you go there and you start executing. Across India, for example, we've got around 22 distribution centers. As on today, only 18 of them are able to work. The rest 4 of them, 2 of places we did not even get permission to operate. 2 more we did get permission to operate. We started operations, and within 2 days the police came and said, sorry, the situation has changed, right? And that's what we mean by hyper local. That's what you will have to keep your eyes on the ground for. This is certainly going to continue for the next 3 to 6 months, where various red and green spots are going to be identified. It will even go smaller when entire localities or even buildings are going to get quarantined, right? So you will need to adjust to this new reality. I think hyper local is extremely important. Your people on the ground have to respond very, very fast to the changing situation. You need to know who makes the decisions there in that area, and you need to be connected to them. So I think that's the one big thing that we have been learning. Every day we believe, so one day we will be saying, oh, great, we've got so many places operational. And the very next day we see that the number has actually come down instead of going up, right? And that's where the responsiveness part comes in. The second one is going to be, I think someone picked around it, and very honestly, I don't have an answer here, which is around how do you forecast in such a situation? Right, so today 40 to 60% of my goods are available at their destinations. The 20 to 25% goods are stuck on the road. I really have no idea when they are going to reach there. People have stopped buying the entire range, and therefore the customers have stopped ordering the entire range, and therefore I need to stop manufacturing the entire range. And therefore for my IBP teams, what do you say, instructions have gone out, say, how do we therefore reduce the complexity across supply chain to focus on what the people are buying today? How do we estimate and understand what people are going to start buying next week? I'm not going to talk about next month. I'm not going to talk about next quarter, because that is too far out to even talk about predictability, right? So I think this whole piece that we used to talk about once upon a time about SMED, single minute exchange of dies, is going to be about single minute exchange of plans, right? And no one is going to today, the factory teams will not be in a position to say, I will not change my plans to suit what is really going to happen here, right? So this whole concept of how fast should we first of all forecast? If we forecast, it is still going to be important. How do we forecast? More importantly, I think the world will move to a DDMRP mode. What gets sold is what you should be making and what you should be supplying, right? Fortunately, we were very strongly into this area over the last 3 to 6 months. Now this is going to be the test whether the system works or not, right? So that's the next big thing.
Thank you,
The
Saurav.
third thing, yeah,
I'll come back to you in a while.
sorry.
Let me bring in Somnath Das from Nivea. And Somnath, what are your views on this disruption, both in terms of logistics and the sector phase?
Thank you, Dr. Singh. So, I just probably call out our story across the day today. So, apart from the COVID disruption that we had, I also have a personal disruption of power outage. So, there's no power in the house. So, I'm on the balcony calling out. Being a responsible, upstream supply chain partner here, I called up Dr. Singh to say that I have a situation. So please plan out and have a BCP in place, which he did have. And then I also had my own BCP as a separate, dongle to, connect here instead of my Wi-Fi. So I think the life remains the same. I think the basic principles will remain the same, but I think some of the elements will play up higher as we speak. So answering Dr. Singh, it has been a quite a journey for the last 21 days, where we had to go by the wire, go by the ear, as Dr. Mathur and Saurabh had talked about. It has been a disruption of unprecedented scale. But what we look at as we move ahead is, as any resilience, team or a supply chain or organization, what important is that how we get back fast. And I think that is the hallmark of a resilient supply chain team. And, how do we get back fast also depends on, how do we plan for it, right? And what becomes very important here is the minute details. What becomes very important here is that, how do we look at the entire chain, starting from the upstream and probably to the downstream. Saurabh definitely touched upon that, how do we have multiple ways of, going to the market and, making them part of our life. So in the short term, what I look at is definitely having a detailed understanding of how our upstream is looking like, what are their risks, and, how do we build in those risks, what are the various ways of reaching out to our consumers, whether it is through a standard go-to-market or through our, multiple new options that are abreast of the changes that are happening on the go. Very critical, as the couple of panelists ahead spoke about, is that how do we learn from each other. As we know that, this situation, the COVID, the entire effort is unprecedented, and I think human species ever attempt to. Why I'm calling it uncoordinated is basically, it is not mandated by any government or any UN or someone to all the countries to go on a lockdown and, fight this whole thing. But I think what has helped here is technology. What has helped here is communication. What has helped here is, information sharing and people learning from each other. And I think there's a lot of learning for us as supply chain team as well to, look at how do we learn from each other and, build on that. While we look at the short term to actually, jump back into. Yeah, Dr.
Somnath, if you could also tell how Nivea has moved into this hygiene product and, that kind of transition during the difficult times, and how it has tried to rationalize the product portfolio for the pandemic period.
Right. So, unfortunately for us, while we are basically a skincare organization, we do have a very small portfolio of hygiene, what we call hygiene. So basically we are into soaps, Nivea soaps, which is widely available, as well as, what came under the body wash category, which is your shower gel and face wash and so on and so forth. So we do have a very limited assortment, which actually we had to play up with. As I was mentioning, Dr. Singh, that we could learn from the development that were happening across the world early on, and we kind of picked up the signals to ensure that our back end supplies in terms of raw materials, pack materials, and all that are in place, are sourced in place. Same thing before things really got heated up in India. We ensured that we have sufficient supplies going into the end of our supply chain from where we could be able to service our customer. So yes, we have done all this preparedness, but having said that, we are also facing tremendous amount of challenges in terms of people, in terms of local understanding, and local regulations, which is definitely is a need for the day. There is definitely a need for the day to be conservative in terms of how operations can work. But having said that, those are the challenges. We have been trying to navigate this. We are working with a government agency in the most compliant manner. What is important here, which Dr. Mathur talked about, is that in such situations, the relationship that you have with your partners. So Satish would be speaking in a short while. So the kind of support that we have got from Agility in terms of helping us in this difficult time is also a testament of what happens when you have a good ongoing relationship with your partners. So I think that also is very important as we move ahead. So the three basic principles of what we have, the three pillars of people, technology, and looking at how do risk mitigation would continue to be there, but I think we'll have to probably dial up and dial down basis the needs of the short term as well as the midterm.
Thank you, Somnath. Now let me go to Anand. Anand, can you let us know about the retail disruption that has happened and the consumer supply chain, how it has changed, how the logistics options multi-channel has played out in this country, and what are the challenges in those terms?
Yeah. So first of all, to ISCM and SAP, really heartfelt thanks for having me on the panel and to share my views with such an eminent panel here. I also wish that everybody who is on the panel and who is listening to this webinar are safe and they're kind of staying home through this period. So very quickly on the consumer retail side. I think the consumers have kind of started moving down to the basic needs and the functional needs. I think survival is what is paramount on everybody's mind, and that's a big shift. Given that in a typical retail environment, you've got a variety of products which suit right from basic needs all the way to esoteric needs. But right now the focus is kind of come only to basic and the functional needs, and I think this is going to continue until we see some kind of stability in the overall situation. I don't even know whether a new normal is a right word, because I don't know what is new and what is normal going forward, right? So that's one key consumer insight, and I think this is, if there was a time to stay invested in understanding consumer behavior, it's now, because what we're going to see is cash is going to be a very important component. Cash is going to get conserved. Cash is going to be limited in supply, and hence it's going to be used very judiciously. So I think as supply chain people, I think we along with the commercial partners should be very clearly having our eyes wide open to see what the consumer is doing and how the consumer is changing behaviors or adapting to this situation, even post lockdowns, at least in the very near term. So that's on the consumer side of things. So now, how has the disruption happened? I think not only the demand, I think the supplies have also got disrupted. I think the panelists have touched upon the key issues that is being faced, and it's no different for any industry. I think in the retail chain as well, we do have issues with manpower, whether it's in the city or outside the city. In the city for different reasons, because you don't have public transport. How do you expect people to come to work, right? But in the rural areas or in the semi-rural areas where DCs are there, the challenges are different. right? Where you've got village communities trying to come and lock down, as Saurabh was saying. I think there are more than few instances where that's happening. So I think, we as responsible supply chains, we have to balance the community safety, health vis-a-vis the business. I think it's a fine balance which we as leaders have a very important role to play in. The disruptions are here to stay. The disruptions, we need to understand it on a maybe day-to-day basis, or even possibly hour-to-hour basis, because just let's take the example of the lockdown lift. I mean, it's not going to happen all of a sudden. It may not happen even uniformly across the country. So how do you really keep your eyes and ears open to really know what's happening on the ground, verify what's happening? I mean, you get a lot of news today on social media or otherwise. How do you really make sure that what you hear is what is happening in the ground, and how do you set up that command structure is something very important in this entire period of disruption. So these are some of the impacts. On your specific question on the omni-channel, I think the consumers have started to look for options, right? And I think Saurabh talked about being hyper local, and I think I kind of agree that that's going to be how consumers will also start looking at it. Whoever can give them what they want is how they will look at it. So we're already starting to see collaboration of FMCG players with last mile delivery companies, and that's I think it's a mother of invention in this time, which I think possibly could be a business model going forward. And I think these are the kind of changes that one has to be aware of, and one has to be nimble about in the shorter range. On the planning side of things, I think forecasting with historical data doesn't make any sense. I think we need to have our ears and eyes open to the front line to get more information on. Most probably it's going to be qualitative rather than quantitative, and take possibly some hard calls on whether it is SKU rationalization, or how do we approach consumers, or how do we even do tie-ups for deliveries through various agencies. That could be what is going to be important. So I would say that the era of on-the-go planning and DDMRP is truly upon us through this COVID situation.
Thank you, Anand. And I call upon a veteran supply chain guru, Dr. Rakesh Sinha. And I think all of us have been influenced by him. He has been propagating agility, responsiveness, and DDMRP long back when people were looking into deterministic models. He was talking about uncertainty and making uncertainty kind of a variability which can be then tackled. And I think it's very interesting to listen to Saurabh about the hyper-local. And as we talk about today, we see that 64 pin codes are totally blocked in the country. And, and we are moving towards the second round of lockdown with maybe some variations. So, sir, in that sense of a term, how do you think the supply chains of future will look? I know you can bring a lot of examples from Godrej and other things, but this is one question which comes to my mind that it would be nice to hear from you.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Singh. The supply chains in future would be quite different. The first and foremost, as I've always been saying, that supply chains which are working on forecast agreed upon at the S&OP are living really in the past era. While S&OP and IBP are very good for resource planning, for capacity planning, and for demand shaping, but when it comes to actual day-to-day supply chain actions of moving stocks, manufacturing, and procuring, we need to be demand-driven. So these cannot be based on the plan which was agreed upon a few weeks earlier. These have to be dynamic on a daily basis. So demand-driven supply chains are doing much better in the current scenario, and that's really the proof that in uncertain times, demand-driven supply chains do much better. There are three important things that we need to do. One is the demand sensing. How close to the consumer are we sensing demand? Are we sensing at consumer level, at retail level, at distributor level, or at CFL level? The closer we are to the consumer, the better we can run the demand-driven supply chain. And second part of demand sensing is the frequency of demand sensing. If we are sensing on a daily basis and getting that data, then it's very good for running the supply chain. So frequency of demand sensing and the closeness to the consumer, these are the two dimensions which need to be done, and not only during this pandemic times, but even on a regular basis, if you want to run a good supply chain. The second part is the flexibility, because we need a fast response. Just fast demand sensing and accurate demand sensing is not going to help unless we have flexibility in the entire supply chain. And the flexibility has to be in sourcing, in terms of the diversity of the supplier base, in terms of their ability to supply fast, in terms of their ability to supply varying quantities. So all the flexibility part with the vendors, then the flexibility in the manufacturing lines. Can we rejig the manufacturing lines to manufacture different types of products which are the need of the hour, or are the manufacturing lines too rigid to produce only one type of item? So during normal times also, companies which have worked on making the manufacturing lines flexible are now reaping the benefits. So flexibility in manufacturing is very important. Do we insist on a 7-day frozen production plan? Then we can't respond in this. There's no question of any frozen production plan. The production plan has to vary on a daily basis, not only during the pandemic, but even after that, if we want a true demand-driven supply chain. So flexibility in manufacturing, and lastly, the flexibility in distribution. How fast? When it comes to responding fast, planning frequency, is it still on monthly, weekly, or has it moved to a daily planning frequency for the supply chain actions? The replenishment frequency, if you're servicing a particular market on a weekly or twice a week basis, have you moved to the daily replenishment frequency? Because the higher the replenishment frequency, the better we will be able to fulfill the demand. So that's another important dimensions. And the third part is the transit time. If it used to take 5 days for a truck to go from Delhi to Chennai, can we cover the distance in 2 days? If the trucks were running about 300 to 350 kilometers a day, can we run 700 kilometers a day and reach the consumers much faster? So these three things are going to be important: the demand sensing part, the flexibility part, and the fast response by the entire supply chain. And these are going to be the determinants of the future success for us.
Thank you, Dr. Sinha. I'll go back to Saurav. Saurav, what would be the challenge? Because one thing that I see as a disruption in the agility and responsiveness framework is the ability of labor at this point of time, which all of us have been talking about. How do you manage this flexibility, and what kind of labor policies and labor management are required at this difficult times of pandemic?
I think, sir, first thing to do with this ensuring that people reach to your site, right? So I think typically against what used to happen earlier, where the labor was available, let's say 5 kilometers within the site, today I've got people who come from 50 kilometers away, right? And they navigate through 3 different districts and sometimes even 2 different states. And like Anand had said, at a lot of places, the local villagers will not allow the bus to come in, and other things will not happen. I think again here, like Dr. Rakesh Sinha said, it's all about agility. So when we found that one particular village was blocked and we had 13 people not able to move out, we believed that this would happen in other places, and we actually moved some 30 to 40 of our associates into a hotel near our factory. Now, what does that mean for us? It means it's an additional cost, but it also means that I've got readily available associates able to come to the factory when required, right? So at least it gives me some sort of predictability of supply. The second thing that we did is, again, I think it's all about on a daily basis, how fast do you change? We looked at, can I run my bus through a different route? So there's nowhere going to be, I've got this fixed route, this is my fixed cost, this is the only way that we operate. We change it. Right. I wish this had happened. This type of a change was allowed much earlier when we were all a cost-based one. We could have been so much more agile, right? But today, that is being changed. What also happens is, in case a truck reaches with raw material, we catch it and we say, no, you can't go back unless you take back my FG with you, right? And we get people from the shop floor who go there and help to load the FG. I've got my executives who do the data entry operation. So this agility of people is also going to be very, very important. We can no longer depend on a set of people who will do one type of job. So it's a pool of people. If I've got 50 people, and yes, earlier I used to say I've got 10 technicians, I've got 20 packers, and I've got 5 loading gang. Today it will be, how many of these guys, you know, that earlier we used to talk about multi-skilling. Very, very important. How many of these guys can actually do data entry? How many of these guys can do loading as well as do packing? Can my process guy work on my packing machine also? Because every day my sourcing is going to be limited. Within that pool, how do I get more people to do more types of jobs? I think that's another piece. Final piece for me is going to be, how do we not force people to come? How do we enable people to come? So is it a question of incentives? Is it going to be a question of providing absolute safety in the plant for them? I think that's going to be a big one. When they leave from the house, the family is saying, why do you need to go, right? If he's going to make a perfume, he may decide it's not a critical item, it's not essential, I don't need to go. If he is making, let's say, what Kellogg is doing, even then, you know, they'll be thought like, do I really need to go? But today we see the demand for food products, for Kellogg products, is really surging. Like Anand had also said, right? People are going to the core things that they can do. They buy the largest pack of cornflakes that they can find because they do pantry loading. Because they do pantry loading and they're locked down, that gets consumed also fast. So you go to the next one. Today we find milk, and same way for me, if I don't buy off the grain from the farmer, he's going to throw it away. So it's a much bigger issue for me. The milling comes to a stop. There are 20-30 people who depend on that miller. So it's going to be an ecosystem. That's why we need to ensure that the people who come to my site are absolutely safe. They feel safe. They see visibly we are taking action. We do cleaning or sanitation of the entire plant every 4 hours. We have marked out circles for social distancing. Actually, this is the time where I cannot run my plant with all 500 people. I have to run it only with 150 because I cannot manage social distancing with that many people. So it's going to be, again, like I said, dynamic. We need to enable our people. We need to incentivize our people, and we need to ensure that they reach the plant to continue operation, and we need to ensure multi-skilling. I think those would be the key points from my side.
Thank you, Saurabh. I think you brought out a very nice point. Agility, dynamicness, your ability to manage given the constraints. And I think this is what is integrated business planning all about. All of you have been doing great jobs in the area of integrated business planning and SNOP. What happens to the future of SNOP and IBP? How does IBP and SNOP actually evolve? Somnath, you have 1 minute to respond to this because we are running out of time.
So I think, you know, a few points that already has been covered on this topic. I think, you know, one critical thing is that we'll need to develop far better abilities to scenario planning. One second thing is, you know, we need to adopt that and make it part of our life, and probably build the technology around that. As Dr. Sinha has said that, you know, in terms of how do we be more agile, be more responsive, instead of having a week-long, and in many organizations there's a month-long, you know, production plan and schedule in place. You know, how can we get better into moving into a daily kind of a production plan? And same thing, flexibility across the chain, not only in terms of procurement, but also in terms of how do we manage our logistics. You know, can we have multiple models of go-to-market, and how do we integrate this? Of course, there will be a certain amount of, you know, divergence in the short term, but I think over a period of time it will also converge. So there's a short take on this.
All right, Dr. Sinha.
Yeah, I think both IBP and DDMRP have a very symbiotic relationship. While IBP is good for long-term resource planning, capacity planning, and in many cases, if you want to shape the demand, not only respond to the current demand, if you want to shape the future demand, then IBP process is very good, and planning for the entire resources. DDMRP is extremely good in making day-to-day supply chain action decisions. So if DDMRP is combined with the might of the IBP, then it's really a killer proposition. What people sometimes do is use IBP for even day-to-day stock movements and day-to-day production scheduling and procurement orders. That may not be required. Let's see what's the purpose of IBP. Use it for that purpose. Let's see what's the purpose of DDMRP and use it for that. And let each one of them feed on the other and have that symbiotic relationship.
Thank you. Saurabh, this comes to your earlier provocation that we are all dead in the long run. That's what you said. Right?
Yeah.
And in that sense of time, how do you see the IBP working? Because, you said it's let's do for today, tomorrow, let's wait for the next run to run itself, but let's be prepared for now. Then in that sense, what is the role of IBP?
So, like,
How
I completely agree with
change
Dr.
during the pandemic?
Yeah, so I completely agree with Dr. Sinha. In fact, this is what I have been pushing our own teams to focus on. And we have been having conversations literally to say, what purpose does IBP serve? I think IBP will continue to provide, if nothing else, financial direction. Right? What is broadly at a category level? What is it that we are looking at? What are the new launches that are going to happen? It will help bring activation in the market together. It will help bring innovation launches, etc., into the market together. The execution will and the replenishment planning will be, I think that's where we draw the line, saying that while we plan for the innovation, while we plan for the activation, while we do the financial planning, use SNOP and IBP to the extent possible. Don't ever use it for your day-to-day execution, management, or talking about manufacturing. If you can manage these two pieces, I think that's where I see this really evolving and the power of IBP coming through. How do we make, I think most companies suffer very badly in innovation planning. I have not seen innovation succeeding or, innovation CFR, etc. at more than 40-50% in the first 3 to 6 months. Right. I think that's where I would put my focus on. Let's get that innovation done, and let's focus really on the big ticket innovation rather
Let me go on to Anand now. Anand, your final take on the IBP. You have been doing a lot of IBP at Mondelez before you came here.
Yeah, I think some of the key points have been covered. I think I would just add one more bit, which is that I think IBP allows you to take portfolio choices. To Dr. Rakesh's point, it is more about demand shaping, right? Wherein you're making active choices on what kind of portfolio that you need to have. So I think that will still remain. The financial guidance will still remain. It will still guide the medium to long term in terms of capacity, resource planning, etc. I think the short term is where I kind of now agree with Dr. Rakesh Sinha that we need to have this as two sides of the coin instead of looking at it in as independent of each other. And I think it can coexist and coexist really well in an organization. But I think the bottom line in all of this is I think this COVID situation has actually put our supply chains to stress, to a real stress test, and I think we know what our strengths and weaknesses are, and I think this will give us a very good platform to understand where we need to work on. And if planning was too broad based, it'll get granular. If it was not in the right frequency, it will get better. And if you're not doing it at possibly a regional level or at a hyper local level, it will get there. I think that's what this COVID situation has possibly presented us in a platter. I think it's up to us to take it.
Thank you, Somnath. Thank you, Anand. Thank you, Dr. Sinha, and thank you, Saurabh, for joining us for this roundtable webinar on navigating through difficult times. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you
Now
so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now I call upon the next panel, Dr. Radha Mohan Gupta from Reckitt Benesar, Mahesh Ketan from Grasim Industry, Satish Lagaraju from Agility, and Deepak Wazirani from Diocese. Before we start with this panel, if anyone of the audience has a question, they can write the question in the chat section. And now let me start with this panel, and we go with you, Radha. China has been a major source of sourcing RM and PM materials. Supply chains across the world are dependent on China, and in such a situation, managing RM and PM post pandemic, and COVID-19 is a very difficult process. As a procurement expert, what are your views on challenges of procurement during the COVID-19 and how do you manage them?
Sure. Thanks, Dr. Sinha. First of all, thanks to ISCM and SAP to invite me on this webinar. And I've been listening to the first panel, and it has been really the realization that issues are same across. Now, within the supply chain, if you see through, I think why it is called supply chain is now very clear. And I think it is proving to be right that weakest link decide the strength of your supply chain. And now in the entire process, if you find the supplier base, which you are having and which you rightly said that, how the supply is being managed over here. So I will come quickly on this, that because of this lockdown, etc., of course, the movement of labor, transport, everything is restricted. And that's the same situation at the supplier end as well. Whatever is in your plant, the issues, challenges which your plant is facing, I think is the similar in the supplier end as well. They are also having the issue in terms of the labor availability, because labor has either migrated already, or they are also, their families are not allowing them to come to the factories over there. Same situation is in terms of transport. You will find that some of the suppliers, they are able to produce, but they cannot supply the material because the transport is not available, or the state borders, on the state borders, there is police who is not allowing the movement. Of course, there are different authorities in Home Ministry, FICCI, as well as other ministry who have given the permissions, but by the time they reach to the ground level and the ground authorities, it becomes a gap between what they between the understanding what they get out of that order and what is understood by the industry. So similar have been, I will say, similar kind of challenges has been with the suppliers as well. Some of them have got the permission to run, and of course, when they are supplier to a company who is into the category of the essential goods, they are also getting permission to manufacture and run their factories. But you'll find from state to state, from location to location, there have been different challenges. Some of the suppliers are getting the permission, but they don't have the labor. Some of the suppliers are not getting even the permission, because, and some of the suppliers, as rightly in the previous channel, Anand mentioned about that, somewhere you are getting the permission, and Saurabh also did mention about this, and after 2-3 days, there are police or the local authorities who are coming and then talking about the shutdown because new COVID-19 cases have been found near around that factory or something like that kind of thing. So situation has been really precarious, and it is the first time, doctor, I would feel there have been the supply chain disruptions across the globe in the past as well, but this is the first time I would say with the extent that both sides are impacted, which is the demand side as well as supply side as well. Now, talking about the challenges which already are mentioned is similar with the suppliers, but I would also say the organizations who have made difference into this difficult time. I think there are few things which they have done differently. I have been talking to my friends across the supply chain, and some of the things which come out clearly that which have given a winning edge to some of the organization is number one, collaboration. I think these companies have gone out of the way to collaborate with their suppliers, and not only sharing, but they are sharing the plans with them. And because the plans have totally changed, what you were supposed to produce now, that has gone totally out of the way. And they are also mentioning about the priority. They are on the daily basis collaborating with them and ensuring that their priority is matching with what is supplier also is having over there. Here I would like to also mention a point that generally people stop at their suppliers end. This is the time where you will find that the supplies are impacted because suppliers, further back-end supply chain which has happened, and people have got into to the suppliers back-end supply chain to help them, and hence collaboration is something which has helped the organizations to do better. Second thing is certainly is the build on the capabilities. you might have some capabilities in this difficult time. And to just give you an example, that you are falling into essential commodity category kind of thing, and your suppliers are not able to run. Now, this is the time that build on your everybody's need, everybody's capabilities, is they're working out with government authorities, giving enough sufficient number of documents and ensuring that your suppliers also get that benefit over there. So another thing could be transport. Some of our suppliers, you will find they are working into the areas where they are able to operate, but the goods cannot go out of their factories. Now, that's where your building on your strength comes in, that you might have the transporter who are maybe they are carrying the finished goods, and you have the good transport network, and they can help you over there in this kind of crisis. So it's not just leaving on the supplier, but building on our capability. Okay, you produce, and we will pick up the goods from there, or we'll provide the transportation which can take it to the required destination over there is. So it is building on the capabilities. And finally, third one, which is certainly, I think, help partners to support yourself. And what do I mean by this is that in the process, you'll find there are the different set of suppliers. There are small suppliers as well. And the cash flow is very, very important for them to run the operations over there. And that's where you come in the WCM, which is working capital management, that can you support them in managing into this difficult time over there? You can provide supply chain financing to them. Can we offer those kind of things? So it is like identify what is the need of that supplier, and then helping them out in this difficult time are the three things I'll say. So to summarize, in the immediate term, I'll say collaborate, build on each other's capabilities, and help your partners to support yourself are the three things which have worked out well.
Yeah, Dr. Singh, you're audible.
Yeah, can you let us know the challenges in global supply chain that you face? And how do you mitigate those risks that are emerging from the pandemic?
Yeah, sure. So it all started with a supply shock from China about, say, 3 months back, when it started in the form of epidemic in China, resulting into some lockdowns and shutdowns. And everyone thought that this is another situation which is peculiar to China, like last year, due to environmental regulations, China had shut down many factories and there was a supply disruption. So many companies thought that this is another supply disruption and China is quite capable of taking care of that. After that, what came is absolutely unprecedented demand shock. As the pandemic spreaded globally to various countries and the demand started reducing, having a global economic impact, then the demand shock started coming in, and this disrupted the entire demand planning, forecasting, production planning, inventory planning, everything. And now we are into an aftershock kind of a situation where we are trying to figure out, after the supply shock and demand shock, what we are likely to do, whether it's a bullwhip effect. If it's a bullwhip effect, how do we manage such a high fluctuation in the demand and the inventory? Now, the impact of all this, the major impact had been the cash flow. This was a totally unexpected reduction in the cash inflow, because at the global level, there were many shipments which were in transit, some in the ocean, some stuck at various ports, could not be delivered to the customers into different countries in Europe, USA, Asia, China. There was a port congestions in major ports in China. So as the material could not be delivered, the cash inflow could not come in. So cash inflow was very limited. And now to take care of the effects of the cash inflow and to manage the complete net working capital, cash outflow had to be managed. So to manage the cash outflow, then the request started going delay in the credit terms, delay in the payment terms. Now this resulted in a complete chain effect, right from customers to manufacturers to the vendors of the manufacturers to their vendors to their customers. Everyone started demanding. the modification of the credit terms, payment terms. This also impacted a lot of financing options from various banks, LC discounting, and so on. So complete chain effect as far as the cash flow management is concerned. Second impact had been on the inventory. Suddenly, the raw material and finished good inventory started piling up in the factories. That is because the factories were shut in India particularly suddenly, and then nothing could be dispatched. Had the organization prepared for it about 2 months back when all this started in China, the situation could have been a little different. But then inventory piling up along with the cash flow resulting into the storage challenges for the inventory of raw material as well as finished goods just added to the effect. The third impact had.
Thank you, Mahesh. I'll come back to you a little later in the next round of questions. I invite Deepak Majirani, the head of supply chain from Diversey. He has been managing a difficult supply chain of the essential hygiene products. And Deepak, what has been your challenges and how did you see the challenges coming? And how did you manage the excessive surge in demand that happened during this period of pandemic, one in China and maybe in India now?
Okay. Thanks for having me over. And of course, before I deep dive, I think the first motto of supply chain, safety first. If there was ever a time, safety first is now. To your question, how we have handled our demand. Now, fortunately, we had picked up some signals from our China times, and what we did was we had started ramping up our capacities. But of course, I'm sure, like it's for whether it's the Kellogg's or the cereals category, or I was reading for Chyawanprash has seen a 50% spike in consumption. So on similar lines, I can only say that we were a little off guard in terms of what we expected the demand would spike. So I thought demand would spike, or we thought demand would spike 10x, but the reality for at least 15-20 of our SKUs has been anywhere from 50x to 80x. So what I can definitely say is that while this is a pandemic, all rules are broken. So what has really caught us off guard is the scale at which the whole demand has got disrupted. I mean, if there was ever a time that we wanted hygiene and sanitization to be learned by every single individual of the 130 crore people, it is today. Today, villagers are asking for sanitizers. Today, they are being forced to wash their hands several times a day, irrespective of whether they have water or not. So demand clearly has surged to a level where it has taken us completely off balance. And we have done demand planning every fourth day, only to realize that whatever number we pick up, it is anybody's guess. So that's one. Two, I think some people have spoken about agility. If there was agility, it is now. And I can give you some examples of agility. For example, we would have introduced, in the last 21 days, we would have introduced at least half a dozen vendors without ever having visited their facilities, without having ever seen their products. Again, these are challenges coming out of the fact that my regular vendors are not able to give me the product. There are times that their spec 100% doesn't match my requirement, but still we have taken some calls. So one, vendor development in the time of COVID, or vendor development without my quality guys ever having seen a facility, unheard of, but it's happening. Two, I can talk about some new product innovations that we are looking at. Most of our senior management is at home. We definitely have our heads and our intelligence with us, but we are trying to develop a couple of innovations, at least 2-3 of them, and have them before we reach office. So what we are attempting is before, definitely in the hygiene category, and And each one of us as professionals, we are going to be heading to our offices after more than a month, probably after 1 month and 8 days, 10 days. Our office needs a very, very different level of sanitization, hygiene. We are all going to get back to our office and say, hey, where is my personal sanitization kit, or how is my desk going to be sanitized every day? So there's a lot of work happening on innovations on that front. Separately, what we have realized is people spoke about agility planning, but if you ask me, I don't know what I'm going to make tomorrow. It's a function of material connectivity. My bottle capacities, I have ramped up 12x. In the last 1 month, we've gone out and developed at least 4 vendors who are able to ramp up their capacities even in times of closure. We have helped because my diversity hygiene is part of the essential category of hygiene. We have gone out, taken permissions for our vendors. We are helping them get passes, curfew passes. So if my whole ecosystem did not support me, how would I be able to keep India safe? How would I be able to keep a lot of products that we supply to hospitals? For example, a lot of hospital laundries get washed with our chemicals. So the whole attempt has been to take the whole ecosystem along, because without my ecosystem, I fail. And a reflection after we come back to office, the people we were dealing with, are they the right vendors? Do they have the right muscle? Are they big enough? So I'm sure some of these things got discussed, but for us, the whole game has been, how does supply catch up with demand? And at the moment, we really see ourselves far away. I have a huge gap between demand and supply. I'm looking at.
I'll come back to you. Let me go back to Satish.
Sure.
India employs 40 million people and a 200 billion industry, logistics. I think the logistics industry is also an essential industry, which is providing support to the essential commodity to reach the right place. Satish, what has been the disruption in the beginning? How the disruption has been solved from all angles, surface, sea, air transportation? How do you see LSPs working with organization? I saw Somnath mentioning about agility, Dr. Reddy. Also, you work with them. So, can you give a nutshell of all these questions as to what would be the future of logistics and how logistics is going to shape up?
Okay, perfect. I hope I'm not the last speaker for the day, because supply chain departments always were the last in the organizations when I started supply chain. But I think now they are in the forefront of everything.
I have put you before strategy speaker, so don't worry.
Yeah. So there has been something known as, we hear Dr. Mathur speak about partnerships of being for long. We spoke about Somnath talking about what. So I think to give you a background of what we've been doing as agility as an organization is that our long-term customers like Dr. Reddy's, Nibia, all these have got the topmost priority, because in this whole situation, we said, whom do we choose first? Are the long-term customers who've been with us for quite some time. We've gone out of way to help them out in this, because what had happened was, when this notification came about the lockdown in March, many of us were not prepared, but fortunately we were well prepared. We learned from a China organization, so we went into work from home from the 17th. But I've been constantly in touch with ministries, and I've been telling that this will become a larger issue, that the notifications will not go to the ground level, passes will not be issued. So while we are on this conference, I think even now the ministry is just given a clarification further. So from 21st of March to today, the 13th of April, it's taken quite some time, over 3 weeks, to get clarification as what is essential and what is not essential. Now, coming to the aspect of capacity and demand, on the air side, what has happened is close to 35% of capacity initially went away, and subsequently with the passenger flight, the subsequent capacity went away. So if you look at the Indian now, currently there are only 3 major operators, which is Qatar, Emirates and Turkish. No other major carriers are actually operating as far as international outbound and inbound is concerned. Also, airports like Delhi and Bombay have embargoes at this point of time. So there is a large amount of constraint in terms of how you uplift pharma. Ocean freight, while it has been a little more better, but the pileup of containers at the ports has really created a big problem. So now government wants us to clear the imports faster, but importers are not coming quickly to come and clear the cargo. On the manpower side, I think that has been the biggest challenge. A lot of people spoke, but I think employee morale is something which needs to be really focused upon. But not many employees are ready to come and work in this crisis because it's a big, major issue that people are not realizing. So for first time in my life, I'm actually talking to the ground level people almost every day behind the scene, because I know they are the ones who can actually get the cargo up and running. Yesterday, I was talking to even drivers who have been driving for Pfizer and the rest of them. So I think it's a completely different situation now. What is going to happen is really not very clear. And also what we are seeing is that the airlines are going to be the biggest sufferers at one point of time or the other, because it's just impossible to be off on the ground for such long time. You know, for them to bounce back is not going to be easy, and the impact on the industry is going to be very severe. So these are some initial takeaways from my side, Professor Rakesh.
No, but on the logistics front, do partnership matter even during the time of COVID-19? Because everybody has been talking about partnership, Satish.
Undoubtedly, see, partnership are of two kinds. One is at a customer level. Reason is that since Radha Mohan Gupta is here, Ricket and Benkai have reached out us last week for some help, and I have moved their traffic into Bangkok and the other places. So partnership coming to within the industry, I think that is the need of the hour, because today we are all running large offices and organizations. If we can partner with someone on some of these areas, like trucking, we are surely looking at partnership to a larger extent rather than running our own fleet, because it makes sense. That's an area where we are looking at surely partnership. Pharma companies looking at common destinations.
Benefited because of partnership which existed earlier, the long-term contracts that you had with your transporters that help you to service your client much better.
Yes, especially the reefer trucks, which are not so easy to get. Our existing partners have actually stood by us, because we've stood by them for quite some time. And some of the people mentioned about cash flow. I think we are very sensitive to making payments to our partners at this point of time. So if we don't partner at this point of time and don't take care of their interests, then how will they survive? I think that's the big takeaway that we all need to understand, is that their survival is our survival.
Right. Thank you, Satish.
You know, that's all about
partnership. I'll go back to Radha Mohan with last question and 1 minute, sir. What would be the long-run procurement strategy that you see? Mid-term and long-term strategy. We are running out of time, so request you to be short and brief.
Sorry,
can you hear me?
I put my mic on now. I'll exactly take 1 minute now. I think it's looking at the kind of supply disruption which we are having. I think on top, on the long term, what will come up more in procurement will be the partnership is number one. Second thing, I think somebody has already mentioned, there has to be a balance between the global sourcing and local sourcing. And this might be balancing means when I say it could be that you have the alternative strategies readily available, not when the disruption comes in. For example, if you are sourcing something out of China or something from outside, do you have the alternate raw material available, which might be costly, but it is available in the system already before the disruption comes? That is the number two. And number three, that at this kind of crisis which you are facing as of now, you are dealing with a number of vendors, and it has to be that fewer and bigger suppliers who can partner with you, who are reliable, and on whom you can work together. These are the three things I'll say will be the trend in the long term for procurement.
All right, thank you. I thank Radhakrishnan, Mahesh Khetan, Satish Lakaraju, and Deepak for being able to enlighten us with the solutions for the future. Thank you very much. Now we invite upon the next set of speakers. I request Madhu to help Girikant and Mr. M. Iswaran from the light to come in.
Hi, good evening, everyone.
Good evening, Girikant. Good evening, Mr. Iswaran. Girikant, as we have been seeing, the discussion on the pandemic and all the aspect of pandemic has been there. In the last few decades, we have been seeing technology and digitalization and big analytics data really emerging as a savior for supply chain management. I think we would like to hear your perspective on the role of technology in pandemic, both in the short run and in the long run, how technology can be a great enabler and putting supply chain organization back into competitive.
I will classify the whole thing into two categories: the technologies that are relevant now, as of today, and the technologies that would be relevant for the reimagined supply chain. What is the technology that we can talk now? Many of you mentioned that it is all about the employee safety. We are not getting the labor, and people are asking, why do you want to go to the factory and risk your life? So there is a need to manage the risk of the employee. Can we put all the labor in the personal protective equipment and then make them work? That's not possible. So there is a geographical risk. Saurabh mentioned about the hyperlocal, which means you have to analyze the risk. What is the kind of risk that is there in Chhattisgarh? What is the kind of risk that is there in Mumbai? What is the kind of risk that is there in Bhiwandi? So there is a geographical risk aspect. Then there is an occupational group related risk. Not everybody is exposed in the same manner. There are people who are being exposed to more people. There are people who can work slightly within the safe distance. Then there is an individual risk. There are youngsters, then there are people with some what we call as the preconditions. So there is a need, like using solutions like your EHS. Okay, that will help you manage this entire risk and come up with that particular risk matrix and put in place the necessary control mechanisms. Even after you put all the control mechanisms in place, there is always certain residual risk. For example, we all heard about that case near Mysore, where 10 people tested positive and 1900 employees had to be quarantined. And that's the truth. So there are technologies. In fact, just before coming into this particular webinar, I was talking to one of the technology vendors, and then he told me that you have these wearables which you can wear inside your factory, and that will identify at what location, how much time have you spent, and then who are the people who have come in close contact with you. And then you have a gateway which will pull all that information and then put it, so that tomorrow if there is an incident, you know who are the people who have to be quarantined. There is no need to go and quarantine all the 1900 people. And when you are talking about the logistics where you have to bring people in the bus, you can't provide a personal transport for all the labor, right? So it will be bus, but however, when you put these technologies in place, it is easy to ensure the safety of the employees, at least mitigate it. And some of these technologies, in fact, I also asked him how much would it cost. For 100 employees, he said it would cost about 6 lakhs. Okay, so that's about how do we address the risk aspect of it. Coming to the cash management applications, okay, you want to work on the credit terms with, like, what if I extend the credit period? And who are the people with whom I can do this? Is it really worth fighting with each and every supplier, or only some of them? And if I manage it only to this particular extent, will it at least ensure my working capital is managed? So there are cash management solutions which can help here. So while these are the technologies that you can consider now, what are the reimagined examples? The one that we see, the best thing that I have heard is, while we are still struggling to get the product from the factory to the consumer, in China, we have heard about 2 hospitals which are built, 1200 beds and 1000 beds in Huoshenshan and Liushenshan. And all of that was done in 10 days and 12 days. Design drawings were prepared in 24 hours, and construction drawings were prepared in Design drawings were in 24 hours, construction drawings were in 60 hours. How did they do it? We can't even get a product in 10 days, whereas they could build hospitals in 12 days. That's because of the interoperability. Because Dr. Mathur and Satish, you were talking about how do I quickly onboard my suppliers. You can onboard the suppliers and you can onboard the logistics providers, provided we make these businesses interoperable. It means we have to work as networks, and right from the moment I place the purchase order, it has to trigger a sales order, and then he should be sending an ASN, and it should create an inbound delivery in my system. Then onboarding any of the new suppliers will become easy. So I see that when a hospital could be built in 10 to 12 days using these principles of interoperability, we will be able to make these supply chains move faster and faster. That's the kind of.
Mr. Iswaran Subramanian is partner with Deloitte and has a very cross-company experiences of guiding people during the pandemic. Sir, what is your take on supply chain management during the pandemic and post-pandemic era? As you come from experiences on supply chain strategy, you've seen organizations reacting differently. Can you tell us what are the few pointers and few things which will remain as a part of the strategy in future for streamlining the supply chain?
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Singh. I think a couple of things. I think a lot of ground was covered by speakers prior as to how people are dealing with the around how situations are changing daily. I think one of the things that we are able to see is that there are enough metrics even now from a COVID scenario which can actually give you city district level data as to what situations are occurring and how people are actually reacting to it. Therefore, my request to a lot of you in the call would be to see as to how you can think of many of those metrics. For example, one of the things that every organization which has a class leading supply chain has been thinking about is something called as a NOT factor. The NOT factor actually talks about how the rate of contacts and how the rate of growth of the virus has been across multiple locations without the classic moment of looking at the number of people alone. What it does is it sort of gives you a proactive indicator as to what the government will take actions on and therefore what you as companies would want to do. That's a very simple example. Therefore, one of the things that you may want to do as you do your day-to-day battles is also start looking at data. There is a lot of data and information which can live in, which is where technology comes in play, mainstream technologies itself, where a lot of data and analysis will help you in your thinking process. The second one that you may want to think of going forward is, while all of you are fighting for today, most of the companies are really looking at how they will actually go on the first head start after the lockdown. Because what is happening now is because cash is really significantly difficult to come by, and I think many authors spoke about it saying how cash is extremely difficult. You're really going to see new operating models in the marketplace, at least for the next 6 to 8 months, and their longevity depending on how much they are able to keep the delivery promise and the quality promise, which means most of them will start thinking about variabilizing cost instead of having it fixed, and therefore really starting to think of what is the best operating model for me, be it on the front end, be it on the back end, where my partners are able to variabilize costs. So if you are anywhere in the chain as an organization, be it consumer business companies like many of our speakers who spoke about today, or pharma companies, or for that matter, even distribution companies, you're going to really see a fundamental change in which your competitors are going to behave across all the three segments. Therefore, one of the things that you may want to really think of now, I think someone spoke about scenario planning in the interim. I think one of the things that you may want to really think of is what is really scenarios. Scenarios are not sensitivities here. Sensitivity is obviously, if I take an example of sensitivity, 3% GDP versus 2.5% versus 4%, put them in the Excel and really take out the outcome. That's sensitivity for me. Scenarios essentially would mean, where do you think the ecosystem and the operating model is going to work? And today, mind you, there are enough and more innovations that have happened. For example, open source in medical devices have happened, creating absolutely new ecosystems. People who are never even creating medical equipment and medical devices are today in the play, and there are design companies in the play, and there are distribution companies in the play. Which essentially means you might end up with new ecosystems in your own business too. So my submission would be two. First one is, while you firefight today, there are enough pieces of data for you to lay your hands on to see where your industry is going and where your micro markets or your hybrid, hyper markets are going. That's point number one. You spoke about being hyper local. Second is, as you start doing that today, you also start looking at what will be the reaction on the pump, as I call that. And the reaction on the bump is because there is enough latent demand. And most latent demand, by all your admissions itself, has not been done. And therefore, there will be enough latent demand, at least for a short period of time. And those short periods of time can really help companies, especially who are having alternate models to conserve cash. For example, one of the things that I would think will be very, very critical for organizations would be not just on the physical flow of material and the information flow, which we spoke about, but also on how cash will flow and reduce working capital. Which means I expect digital payments to be the route for all of you guys to do business going forward in a very, very significant manner, because it then cuts down working capital cycle and the associated norm by a factor. So which means these are 2-3 things that I see companies really doing, and therefore the focus on scenarios will be completely different. It is not the traditional scenario planning. And if I were to take what was said earlier just now in terms of where technology can come in, I think this is where you would end up with technology. Now that you have experienced some of these disruptions, I would think the role of technology, especially in this, in really looking at some of these factors, will become very, very relevant. To that extent, I think even the factory models will obviously go through some level of reallocation and redesign. So those are a couple of things, Dr. Singh, I thought may be relevant to people as they start thinking about the future. And mind you, there are 3 stages, right? And the 3 stages are obviously what you're doing now, which is navigating. The second stage where you're trying to sustain, which is immediately after the lockdown, where you have the Hampton scale. And the third one is the business as usual, which I think is the driving scenario for business. So, you may want to really think of all these things as you go forward and plan for the next few days, and at least for the next 8 to 10 days.
Saurav, there's a very good question on the your hyperlocal listing. Lockdown may not be lifted across India in uniform motion. So how will we manage the supply in terms of distribution to interstate movements of goods and different localities? So what are your, how do you see this?
One of the big things is going to be to, I think this is a opposite scenario to GST. Wherein we were saying or rather a similar scenario to GST, wherein we have to use a regional network to fulfill demand. So for example, if Patna is locked down, or rather my Patna warehouse is locked down because it's in part of a village which is under lockdown, I have to try and supply it through Calcutta depot. Right, so we'll have to be very, very open around it. We'll have to take extra time. So right now, if my supply time is 2 days, we'll have to extend it to 3 days and say I will be supplying it through a different depot. I may have to go in for direct supplies. Like I said, it will be consolidation of loads, consolidation of orders, and then figuring out which is my best link there. Again, a question of agility. We can no longer be saying that this distributor is linked only to this CFA and can only be supplied from this part. It will have to be open-ended. Even today, what we do, we prepare the billing or the invoices or paperwork at one CFA, open the relevant CFA at 4 o'clock in the morning, load the vehicles and see that they are back by 10. So that's sort of those are the ways of working that we are actually using right
now. And that's true for even the demand management, right?
So demand management would also be true because, or rather sales management, let's say, our teams have become very, used to taking orders on phone calls, right? Because they are not able to go into the market, but they have built up their relationships, and now orders flow through phone calls. We ask our distributors or our retailers to come and pick up stocks if required. Various things are being done. We have not tied up with others like with online delivery systems, but possibly that's something that we will try in the future.
All right, thank you. Welcome, Mr. Ishwan. There is a question from Mr. Deepak Kumar who says that because of this pandemic, will the cost of logistics services go up, and will this lead to the monopoly by the 3PL, large 3PL companies in the country? Satish was not there, so I think I'll put you into it.
Yeah. Take it in two parts. First one is if you look at which is why I come back to data. If you look at where global indices are moving in the last 30 days, you can take, C index, which is Baltic, or you can take a TAIR index, which is TAC, etc. All of them are looking at a significantly higher surge. Therefore, I think one of the things that you should expect is, like what I said, because latent demand will hit utilization with a bump, at least in the short term, you will have costs going up because people will also be really looking forward to shipping it out to the most important clusters of demand. And unfortunately, you would have noticed in India now, and I think many of it was said earlier, the demand and supply clusters are not in the most synchronous phase because we also had incentives and promotions earlier for us to skew industries towards certain locations and sectors. Therefore, I think by design, we have a demand supply ecosystem to be moved through logistics, and therefore you will expect that impact. The second is, I think if, forget whether it is a monopoly by 3PL or whether it is a omni-channel model for last mile that might come in for most models which we did not have earlier. I think one of the things that you may want to remember is as long as costs get variabilized, people will look for those models. Therefore, if you are able to really look at a variable model for you to plan your logistics compared to what some other person offers or any other operating structure offers, I think that is a model people would start looking for. And you should expect new players to come in because one of the things that the COVID has taught us in the last 20, 30 days is essentially that there are alternate channels which have found their way into this, and they're finding out that some of these sectors are far more profitable for them in the long run and what they are traditionally dealing with. And the specialization requirement seems to be broadly the same in terms of quality and delivery promises. Therefore, I would expect that not just remaining to the definitions of 3PLs, I would think that anybody who has a variabilization impact on cost through even an ecosystem route will be an important driver in the future. And if that impacts traditional models, I would assume yes. So that would be my answer. I would think the driver would be variabilization, not very specifically even individual companies.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Radhamohan Gupta, there is a question from somebody who is asking that because of this particular pandemic, is India going to be the next hub for manufacturing, and it will benefit in the long run?
I think it's a very good question. In terms of if we look at what is happening in China and in past also SARS, etc., and we got already the benefit. And with Prime Minister making a move for Make in India kind of thing, I'm very hopeful that it is an opportunity. While it is a disaster and it is so bad situation as of now, I think there is a huge opportunity for a country like India, where the labor costs are still much lower than China. In spite of the minimum wages going up in recent past up in India, I think it's a huge opportunity for India to capitalize and make in India, make in India mission of our country really a reality over here. So in a nutshell, yes, it's going to be a big opportunity. We have to capitalize. Only a word of caution that China also has passed through this phase in terms of it became a chemical hub, and the kind of industry they had and the kind of explosion recently in an industrial park which happened over there, it causes a environmental kind of risk, which we as a country need to be careful that we need to encourage the value adding industry coming in and encourage those kind of investment. That is only the word of caution. Otherwise, it's a huge opportunity, and I'm looking forward that India becomes even a bigger manufacturing hub with government's policies and support in near future. Thank you.
There is a question, Dr. Sinha, that We have all been talking about supply chain visibility across supply chain, but what has happened to that and how that can be enhanced further? I think it is more on the agility and responsiveness that you talked about. So can you unmute yourself?
Yeah. So the visibility starts with demand visibility. So as I said earlier, the demand sensing is important, and the closer to the customer we are, closer to the consumer, the better it is. So visibility starts from there. In addition to that, what we need is visibility of stocks at different nodes in a typical DTMRP scenario. Beyond that, we don't really need too much of visibility. Everything else is a derived action, whether it's a production schedule, whether it's a procurement plan, all these are derived actions: distribution plan, production plan, and procurement plan. What we need is whether the actual production, procurement, and distribution has happened as per the plan or not, and that's something that's very easy to get. So visibility should not be an issue, provided we are not looking for too much of superfluous data. We need a few pieces of data, and those data are easy to get.
Anand, there is a question on, again, supply chain visibility within retail system, and also, the last mile delivery. What are the challenges of the last mile delivery?
I think it remains, largely on manpower. Right. Remember that our cities are locked down, and there are hotspots. Movement within the cities, despite passes, etc., has actually been a little ambiguous. I think those will hopefully ease out over a period of time. Right. And also, I think what is emerging is every day there's a new hotspot in the city. Right. So what was true yesterday, what was true about at the start of the day, in the evening it could be very different. I think it's also keeping up with information on which are the areas which are getting locked down. Is there an alternate route to reach the same place, etc. I think those are going to be challenges. I'm not sure if Google Map has got all the answers in this case.
Thank you. This thing. Can I have Giri? Giri, there has been a question on use of artificial intelligence and automation in warehouses are serving the purpose, but how do you get them connected to the transporters? And how do you solve the problem of manpower and transportation using technology?
Yeah, as Anand said, how can we the same use of technology there? One of the things that people are talking about is predicting the ETAs. And typically when you use the Google Maps, you get the expected time of arrival at your destination. Those algorithms are working even today. And they are also taking into account whatever local restrictions that are there. We have seen that. Okay. So that's how all this ML and artificial intelligence algorithms can improve the transportation process and bring in that particular visibility. The second one is related to the warehouse automation. Yes, warehouse automation. Again, I go back to the example of China. In India, when we talk about the warehouse automation, we always say that no, we don't have good network capabilities, and hence we would like to keep the server close to the warehouse. But in China, what they are doing is through that industrial internet, they are able to operate the equipment remotely, which means you could be sitting in Uttar Pradesh and you could be operating an equipment here in Bhiwandi and one more in Chhattisgarh. So, and this is not fiction. These are the things that they have done by reducing again, I go back to the example of that 1200 bed hospital that they built. How did they build? They did not transport all the labor there. They used a lot of this industrial internet in order to achieve this. So I see that there will be more automation, and then we will be leveraging all these telecom networks 5G, etc. And it will bring in a lot of productivity. Interoperability will improve, and we'll be working more as closely knitted networks. It is not one individual company, but it is a value chain competing against another value chain.
All right, thank you, Girikant. Dr. Sinha, there is another question to you, which is on Jara supply chain. How would Jara supply chain look now? Can you unmute your...
Sorry. Yeah. Which supply chain? I didn't get your question.
Jara fashion supply chain.
Oh, fashion supply chain.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in fact, that's a good supply chain model because it's completely demand driven. And the good thing about Zara is that they are in the fashion business and they don't repeat the styles too frequently. There are few stable, I would say, equivalent of staples which they keep replenishing, and everything else is just a one-time introduction to the market and it goes off after that. But for staples, the type of replenishment which they manage is truly following the DDMRP principles, and that's what is required for all other companies as well. So I think they will continue to do well because their model has always been DDMRP type, and it's worth emulating by everyone else.
But in the short run, when so many supermarkets are closed around the world, what would be the impact on them? That could be
So
another impact.
So the production would go down. In the DDMRP scenario, if the demand takes a dip, then the production has to dip. Not only to the extent of the demand dip, but even more than that, because intermediate inventory buffers will also get resized to a smaller value. So production dip will be much more, and the procurement dip to their vendors will be even bigger. So in a decelerating demand scenario, the production is less than the sales and the procurement is even less than the production. And they would follow that because the DDMRP would dictate that.
Thank you, Dr. Sinha. I think this should be the last question as we have overrun the time. And it has been a lovely discussion, right from how factories are facing problem, how logistics in India has changed and it is no more a problem, but it's a manpower problem. The manpower management within business disruption is a great matter of opportunity and concern for the workplaces of India to become much better. As Giri said, technology can help the workplaces and factories and the condition of drivers and logistics to improve better. A better demand-driven MRP, understanding the market in a hyper-local way may go a long way in planning this pandemic in the immediate and the midterm future. And also looking at how different, like for instance, what Deepak said was that we look at the newspaper, China Post data, and we really saw how the pandemic is going to emerge and how its spread is going to emerge. We moved away from China. It's very important to look at the news and make views of the news in terms of your planning in the larger macro economy, because the global macro economy is going for a problem. And I think predictive and tech data, collecting more data of all quality will help us to build a strategic perspective. And as Dr. Iswaran said from Deloitte, that business continuity plan is important. And I think this is what a complete business continuity plan would be. Pandemic would emerge in a very different way. The uncertainties are going to be dominant, and how do you make sense of the uncertainty? As someone says, make it more valuability is much better. So I thank all the speakers and all the attendees, and we will deal with the questions which could not be dealt with here because we had 12 different mindsets. Within 1.5 hours, you have excused us for the overrun of the time, and we did not have time for questions, but we will answer all the questions from the relevant panelists and get back to you. So I thank all of you and SAP and ISCM team for making this webinar a success. Thank you very much.